I'm going to try and give you some things to think about this idea of navigating a multi-generational workforce. I don't know if I speak a lot on Sunday, so this may be challenging for me. All right. So I want to just to acknowledge that, we are certainly in an interesting time in our workforce for a lot of reasons over the last several years. And the diversity of the age range in our workforce is just one aspect of what makes our workforce so interesting. But for the next 60 minutes, we're gonna spend some time diving into what that looks like. We're going to give you some information to consider and to be curious about in regards to this multi-generational workforce. I will give you access to the slides afterwards, and I have a resource slide at the end of that might be helpful to you as well. So please sit back and just kind of absorb and take in the information today, and know that you can get some of this information later on. All right, let's see. I also just want to say in our session today that we're gonna be talking a lot in generalizations, and sometimes that's easy then to put people in boxes or to stereotype them. And that's not what today is all about. It's about just some generalizations to have some starting and interesting points to talk about. But please remember our principles of community and use them as a foundation to remain curious and engage in conversations with your coworkers, and really embrace the idea of inclusion, integrity, and respect in those conversations as you have them. So really what I'm going to try and highlight today are to explore the concept of generations. I want to acknowledge that there are different viewing points for these generations and how we might start to embrace that in a different way. And then truly just to outline steps to embrace all coworkers. All right, so I will tell you that as I began in this topic area, it's a very interesting topic area because you can find lots of different resources, and the resources don't all match up. Some people don't even believe in the concept of generations. So, really trying to nail down on one thing was challenging for me. And I'll try to explore that a little bit as we go through. But a few things I want you to consider, and it's this idea of this concept of generations is just a tool to give you some more information to be curious about, and that it is just one tool in your toolbox, and that you should not rely solely on just this tool as you develop your relationships with your coworkers. A couple other things is, again, I shared that we were going to be talking in generalizations, and they are not meant to be stereotypes. That personal preferences may vary widely, especially for people who are born near what they say the cusp of the generation cohort that we'll talk about. So if you fall within 1 or 2 years on either side of those birth dates, birth ranges, you may not identify with some of the things that are in one, or you may identify with two different cohorts as well. And again, as I said, experts don't always agree on the defining line or the year or the names of the generations. And so recognize that this is, it's not a finite thing. It's not a definite thing. It's just some observations as we go through. So this idea of generations is really about looking at a group of people of a particular age range that possibly share a distinct set of beliefs, attitudes, and values because of the age or the particular period in history that they were born, and how it influenced them during some of our, influential years, as we were identifying with what our beliefs and our values were, that these things may have impacted us in our as we were maturing. And again, we, some of us who may be baby boomers experienced the things that Generation X and millennials and but we were at a different stage in our lives. So they may have impacted us or influenced us differently, right? So it's just an interesting thing to think about of how that might influence you. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But this idea, here are the 5 generations that actually are showing up in our workforce. And again, even that is a little bit different, and typically we didn't have 5 generations, but a lot of that might be due, we're living longer, we're living healthier, so people are staying in the workforce longer. And so we are seeing these variations of 5 generations in the workforce. And again, these are the titles and the years that have been designated out. I used Pew Research to identify these dates. So again, you might see slightly different dates. And I've even seen the baby boomers broken down into 2 different sections because that's a large time span. Generally, it's about 20 years, but I've read in several articles about even the idea of our current generations, because things are changing so much and we have so much information and are impacted by so many different variables because of our access to information, that those timeframes might even need to be shorter than 20 years. So again, take this as a point of information for you to look at. I do have an infographic that I can send to you. The link is from the Purdue University, sorry, Poudre Valley, Poudre University. I'll get that, Purdue University. And it breaks it down into some areas about what they think these generations were shaped by, motivated by, and communication styles. So I'm going to share that with you as a later date, because this might be some interesting things to have conversations with. Say, hey, what do you think? And if you're in this generation, what does this look like for you? Is this valid for you? Does this ring true for you? And again, being curious about it, not just assuming that this is fact for those generations, but it gives you some good information. So I'll share that. I want to walk through just real quickly, and I will tell you, in one of my resources, I found a great online course. It was through Udemy, which is a vendor for online courses. And the person had created like 5-minute videos of each generation, and they put music and events and all of these different things. So if you're a visual learner and that's something you're interested in, you might want to check out that resource. I found it very entertaining. I don't know that, it necessarily gave me any more insights, but it was interesting to see the different events, the music, all of those things that was in those videos. So something to think about if you want to explore that a little bit more. But let's just touch on each of those generations here for a moment. And I want you to begin to think about where you might fit in the year you were born, and know that may ring true or not for you. But the traditionalists were greatly impacted by the Great Depression. Oh, and I should say traditionalists are also known as the silent generation, the greatest generation, matures, radio generation, GI generation, post-war generation. Again, lots of different names that you may have heard them be referred from. Baby boomers born between 1946 and 64. And this is the one that's probably the most referred to, even census data, they talk about the baby boomers because of the spike in the birth rate that began in 1946. Very much impacted by the civil rights movement. Generation X, 1965 to 1980. Generation X is also known as the baby bust, the busters, slackers, Xers, 13ers, as in the 13th generation. Again, lots of different names that you might have heard them referred to. They might have been influenced by the event of the Space Shuttle Challenger explosion. Millennials are 1981 to 1996. They're also known as Generation Y, Next Gen, Gen Next, Generation We, and of course, the impact of the September 11th World Trade Center attack for that generation. And looking at this, the fifth generation now in the workforce, Generation Z, 1997 to 2012. Generation Z is also known as the internet generation, or iGen, Zoomers, post-millennials, centennials. Again, a lot of different names, and of course, certainly impacted by the most recent event of the pandemic, and lockdowns and wearing masks and those types of things. Really short overview of those, and again, you can find lots more information. I will say the next generation that I saw identified is having been identified as Generation Alpha. They're not in the workforce yet, but from the birth years of 2013 to 2025. So just so you have kind of in your range, if you start hearing about Generation Alpha, that's who they're talking about. So I'd like to do a quick poll here, and we're going to have you use Poll Everywhere. If you've not used Poll Everywhere, there's two ways you can access them. You can go to polleverywhere.com/TDCOL state to access this, or you can text the number 37607 TDCOL state, and it will send you into the Poll Everywhere. And I'd like to get a sense of who's in the room based on your birth date. Oh, there we go. We're starting to get some replies. So give people a moment to get there. I love watching it change on the screen. And Sarah has put the information in the chat if you need that as well. I'll just give you a couple more seconds to let people identify. Doesn't seem to be moving anymore. All right, so actually we have the most millennials in our session today. A few baby boomers and Generation Z. We didn't get all 5 generations. I was really hoping I'd get all 5. I maybe needed to recruit some people to do that. All right, thanks for giving that information and sharing that with us, just so we have an idea of what that looks like. So again, we talked about this idea of this interesting time in our workforce, and I think, again, this is why the age cohort doesn't always work for me, because it's really that there's so much social change that's happening in our world right now that it really may be impacting us even more than we think, and it may showing up differently for different generations. Again, thinking about how our attitudes and our beliefs and our values are being impacted by those social changes, and thinking about, even I think of this idea that the pandemic has really put in the forefront the idea of remote work and hybrid working, which were in existence for many years, but we weren't embracing them in the same way. And different generations may be able to to embrace that differently because of their life stage, right? Some people may be in their early part of their career, and doing a remote job in San Francisco and living in Colorado might work perfectly for them. Whereas someone who has a lot of other obligations and just feels like that's too much to try and navigate with the time changes and whatever that might be, that might not be as an option for them. Or the idea of, I can go live in San Francisco and work in Colorado might be an option for someone, depending on their life stage and their career stage, where for others it might. So there are lots of reasons why those freedoms and choices and change impact the different generations in different ways. And when, as a baby boomer, when I entered the workforce, I mean, we looked at, careers being at least 10, maybe 15, 20 years at an organization. And I don't believe that the generations now see it that way. Things are changing too much. Just doesn't make sense anymore for them to be thinking about, oh, I'm going to join this company and may retire from that company. That's just not in that. It doesn't make sense in our changing world. Whereas someone in my generation, that very much was a possibility. And so those things just impact how we show up in the work environment and how we view other people's interaction in the work environment as well. So one of the things that I found in a resource was this idea of, if you've ever heard yourself say this, that they just don't get it. This may be something that might be around a generational aspect or area, with the idea that they is a member of a different generation. So it could be a millennial saying this, it could be a traditionalist saying this, it could be a baby boomer. And a lot of times the it is what the author identified as sticking points. And these are kind of 12 kind of sticking points that they often think that have been influenced by, the things that we talked about, events, music, all those things, may impact how we show up in the workplace around communication, the modes of communications that we use, and how we like to communicate, decision making, who's making the decisions, how they're being made, dress code, what's appropriate, what's not appropriate in the workplace, feedback, the type and the frequency of feedback may be different, fun at work, what that really looks like, what's considered fun, what's appropriate fun at work, the knowledge transfer, the idea of how important to understand the history and to acknowledge someone's experience in a workplace may vary in those generations. Loyalty, we talked about that, how long people should stay in a certain job, how long they should be in a position before they're eligible to be promoted. Again, I think some of in our earlier generations, they knew that they had to kind of earn that experience, but the way we are gathering information and things are changing, that's shortened in our current work environment. So if that time of, you have to at least do X number of years before you would be eligible for this type of position, may not ring true anymore in our workplace. Meetings, the purpose of meetings, how we interact in the meetings. There are several examples of people saying, people bring their laptops and they're on their laptops in the meeting while we're in face-to-face and doing other things. They're multitasking. That's so unrespectful. And other people may say, look, I have an opportunity to do this quick thing when the agenda is not about me. So again, different viewing points, as we'll talk about a little bit more here. Policies, when the policies were made, do they still apply? Are they still appropriate to what the business needs are, or were they just something that we've always done and we've never really looked at updating them? The respect, what that looks like, how that shows up in the workplace. Training, the types of training, how people like to be trained, whether it may be, a micro learning that they can access on their phone as opposed to a face-to-face learning, and recognizing how those styles might be very different. And just the work ethic, and a lot of that is around even the idea of work-life balance, where our boundaries are, and how that might show up differently. Now, as I went through this, you probably were beginning to think about, oh yes, what it means to me. And again, it may be based on your generation, and you may have different aspects or different viewing points for a lot of different reasons beyond generations around all these sticking points. And that's really what I want you to begin to think about. Generations might be a starting point for you to have an awareness that there are differences, but really where the value comes and the richness comes through is really talking with your coworkers about how that might show up for you differently. So I'm just curious if you would do another poll, and you can choose 3, I believe, here, and check which are the top 3 sticking points that you identify most in the workplace. What have you noticed in your workplace that you kind of feel as, oh, this is where we kind of sometimes don't always agree with my coworkers, or see it coming up differently? So again, we're in poll everywhere, and hopefully it launched this new question, and you should be able, okay, perfect. I see some responses. So I always like to know it's working. Give you a couple more seconds here. It seems to still be moving. All right, so our top 3 answers look to be communication, fun at work, and work ethic. And again, we got responses to most of them there, except for feedback and training. And if we had more time, we could dive in and talk more about what that is. But I just wanted to get a general view of just what people were experiencing. None of these surprise me. Certainly, I think communication is a challenge always in the workplace. So I don't know that it's just about generations. And some of the ideas of what motivates us and influence us might be a great place to start around how we communicate and what that looks like and what our preferences are and how we do that. So again, I want you to keep in mind this idea of looking at it as a viewing point and not a point of view. And these are real subtle differences, I know, but a point of view can be very personal. This is my point of view. This is how I see the world, and this is what feels right to me. And really, I want you to think about these conversations around the sticking point should be an opportunity for you to learn and get a sense of your coworkers' viewing points. And the viewing points, I hope, broaden that perspective for you. It's an opportunity for us to learn how others might be seeing communication or decision making, or any of those top sticking points that we talked about, and just really being curious and open to that there might be a broader perspective, that there's no one right way, and then how we might find some areas to be flexible and accommodate some of those different preferences, those different viewing points. So just want you to just think about that, about, oh, am I thinking about this from my point of view, or can I see it more broader from a viewing point? And we talked about this earlier. You remember this slide, a few things to consider when we're talking about generations, but I've added this last piece in that the key to understanding our coworkers is through communication. So how can we engage in these topic areas with our coworkers? And I'm gonna talk about some ways to do that a little bit here as we kind of wrap up, and then I'm going to give us an opportunity to practice. So there's 5 steps that you can do to embrace differences in the workplace. And again, this is just not even around generations. This is just in everything. And the first one would be to acknowledge, talk about your viewing point, your ideas of how this shows up for you, and share that with your coworkers about, well, here's what I'm thinking when it comes to communication, or here's what's important to me when we to get feedback. So acknowledge what that looks like. And when you're having these conversations, asking the other person, tell me what this looks like, help me understand, give me more information, really, and listening for commonalities. We often listen, oh, well, that's different than how I am, and that's different than how I am, but change your thought process and see if you can listen for how they are common, and see if you can find those commonalities. Oops, sorry. I want you to appreciate where they're coming from and continuing to ask, well, why? Why is that important to you? Not what is important to you, but why is that important to you? And we're going to do an exercise where I'm going to ask you some questions. And again, I want us to be thinking about how can we be curious and asking why, and how does that show up for you in our interactions as coworkers or in the workplace? Why is that important to you in the workplace? Why is that possibly a sticking point for us? So that word why, and again, you don't want to, well, why? You don't want to use it in like, are you, that doesn't make any sense to me. Why would anyone think that way? It's like, why is that important to you? That sense of curiosity is really important. And then thinking about how you might flex. Well, now that I know that about you, and now that I know you would prefer me to text you than email, I can do that. I just, email is my go-to, but I do have my cell phone right here. I can text you. That's something I can easily flex to. So thinking about what those opportunities to flex and accommodate and negotiate with other people on what that would look like. Thinking about how you leverage those strengths. What does that look like? Well, I'm not really good at using Teams. So can you give me some tips in Teams so that I can use that technology better? And how do I, use the chat and all the files that are available? So doing some cross-generational training and looking at people's strengths of how they can help you learn more about these different ways. And same with, maybe we have something that's an older technology, but we still use it very consistently. How can someone share with you what that technology is from a different generation as well? And then the idea of resolving is if it's not an option that flexing really works. I mean, we can't do it 5 different ways. We really need to pick one way because of consistency or compliance or whatever there might be. Then we really need to come up with which option is the best and to understand why that option is the best. And I'll go to my next slide to kind of, when you choose and resolve to one option, you need to be thinking about how that option really serves the needs and not the preferences, right? Because it might be, well, I just like email better, so y'all just need to email, right? Well, if that's not serving the needs, I mean, what's the business need of this? Is it serving our customers? What's the reason we're doing it? Because we have policies that at the time made sense, but now they may be a preference and not a need. And so we need to have that. And the picture in this is of flip-flops. And there were lots of stories about, how appropriate a workwear was not flip-flops. And, if, again, that might be true in a manufacturing firm, or maybe in the dining services area, that flip-flops may not be appropriate because of health and safety reasons. But is there really a business justification for not wearing flip-flops in other environments? I don't know. And, if just because my generation didn't wear flip-flops, that wasn't done, that's not why we don't do it. So again, that's just a really light example of some of those conversations of, is this a preference or a need? And encourage you again to just smash those stereotypes, that it's really about getting to know your employees, asking them about their personal preferences and needs, and really encouraging those cross collaboration, generational collaborations, and challenging when you hear about, oh, those millennials or those Gen X's, saying, wait, where are you getting that information? Or talk to me a little bit more about that. And is that just a generalization? And how do we dig in deeper to have a better understanding of our coworkers, rather than just putting them in that box? All right, so I've just talked way too much. So I'm going to ask us to do a quick breakout session, and Sarah's going to help me put you in groups of 2 or 3. And I know we don't have as wide a variety of generations, so who knows, what the makeup of your group will be. But I think that's totally fine, because I think you'll start to see some different responses, but I think you'll also see some commonalities. So there's a couple of ways we can do this. If you have a camera, you can take a picture. I've listed about, 7 or 8 questions here. I don't want you to answer all of them. Personally, you can pick 1 or 2, and I want you to share them in the group. And I want you to think about how your answers impact how you show up at work. And I'll give you an example. So how many siblings do you have, and where do you fall in the order? I have 3 siblings. I am the youngest. My oldest brother and sister, there's like a 10-year gap between me and my oldest brother and sister. And I'm somebody else. Yes, yay, this younger son. So what I recognize is I was very much always getting brotherly or sisterly advice through my growth years, my influential years. And how that shows up in work is that I truly seek out people's opinions, people's advice, because I was always getting that as the youngest. And sometimes I really appreciated it, sometimes I didn't, but it was just how I went about making decisions. So it shows up in my workplace. I seek out advice from my coworkers, and it doesn't always have to be someone who's older than me. I like seeking out advice from others. That's how it shows up in the workplace for me. It's also been interesting for me now as I'm getting more mature, that even having that youngest syndrome, I mean, I was just always the youngest, and now I'm like, I'm not the youngest anymore. So it's just interesting how my mindset is, I was used to being the youngest in the environment, and that's not true anymore. But just recognizing how that might show up for me in the workplace. So that's an example of what I want you to do in your breakout groups, is just share something about that, how you think it influences you in the workplace. And as you listen to it, think about whether there's some commonalities. All right, Sarah, let's give them 10 minutes. So take a picture if you need to have those questions for you, or grab one off of there now before we send you to your breakout rooms that you want to talk about. Is that fair? Any questions for me before we send you the breakout? So each of you can answer one of the questions. You might ask a little bit more, well, why is that important to you? Or why do you think that influences you in the workplace? How does that show up? What does that look like? And search for commonalities. All right, Sarah, are we ready to send them?
Yep. Okay. So I'll send you into those. I also threw it in the chat, and then just keep in mind at the end, there will be an attendance form. So we'll have a little wrap up So make sure you do come back.
Yes,
out of your
please come back.
breakout room to the main session.
All right. See you in about 10.
All right.